Well, good morning and welcome everybody to our annual Memorial Day event. We are honored to host this event every year, and in order to remember those who have put their lives above everything else to secure our freedoms. At this time, please stand for the presentation of the colors by the Marine Corps League Paul Boyd Detachment 579 and remain standing until the invocation. And I now ask the Marine Corps Reserve Band New Orleans to play the national anthem. First guest will be Mr. William Friedman, past 2nd District Commander of the American Legion, Department of Louisiana, who will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance, gentlemen. We got other flags.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
And now Chaplain William Meyer III from the American Legion Post 397, 2nd District, will lead us in the invocation.
Almighty God, our Heavenly Father, in your hands are the living and the dead. On this Memorial Day, we give thanks for those, our comrades, who have laid down their lives in the service of our country. May they rest in peace. And may light perpetual shine upon them. May the good works of seeking justice for the oppressed and peace for all mankind be rewarded with success. That their sacrifices shall not have been in vain. And may we never fail to remember the awesome cost of the freedom which we enjoy. All this we ask through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
And you may be seated. At this time, if you'd please allow me, I'd like to introduce some of the elected officials who have joined us this morning. First, our council chairwoman, Ms. Cynthia Lee Shang. Our councilman at large, Mr. Keith Conley. We're in Jefferson Parish Council District 5, who is represented by Jennifer Van Branken. Our District 4 councilman, Mr. Dominic Impastato. Our District 3 councilman, Mr. Paul Johnston. Oh, District 2, sorry. Sorry about that. Our District 1 councilman, Mr. Ricky Templett. We have our mayor from Oswego, Mr. Joe Peoples. We have our constable, Mr. Al Leone Jr. We have our registrar of voters, the Honorable Dennis DeMarco. We have our former parish president, Mr. John Young, and a former chief of police for the city of Kenner and one of my best staff members, Mr. Steve Caraway, and a former Marine. I'm sorry, Steve. I know, not former Marine, always a Marine. I apologize. Y'all indulge me on that. And I don't think I missed anybody. Hopefully that's everybody. If I did, I'll come back later. I did leave one person out. I'm honored to have join us today two ladies in my life that we're trying to teach the importance of Memorial Day to one of them. My beautiful wife, Michelle, and our beautiful daughter, Reagan. I'm glad Reagan just graduated kindergarten, so she's learning all about Memorial Day, and she knows what the Navy's all about. So today, as we remember the men and women who sacrificed their lives for our freedom, I am reminded of the Battle of the Philippines during World War II and the nearly 80,000 lives lost in the 6-month campaign from 8 December 1941 to 8 May 1942, some 77 years ago. September will mark the 74th anniversary of General MacArthur's victory in the Pacific, but it was never lost on him with the sacrifices that were made to win that war. 57 years ago, on May 12, 1962, General MacArthur addressed the Corps of Cadets at West Point in his now famous Duty, Honor, Country speech. He said, "The soldier above all others prays for peace, for it is the soldier who must suffer and bear the deepest wounds and the scars of war." He quoted Plato, one of the wisest of all philosophers, "Only the dead have seen the end of war." So this Memorial Day, let us remember all of those who have lost their lives above everything else and paid the ultimate sacrifice for our freedom. Over 1 million people have died to defend our freedom, and hundreds of thousands continue to fight and preserve that freedom for us. Today, our guest speaker is certainly one who helped preserve that freedom. Colonel James Jackson from the Lake Charles Post No. 1 of the American Legion. Colonel Jackson began his military career while in college as an enlisted soldier in the United States Army Reserve. He joined active duty service in 1961 and was later accepted into Infantry Officers Candidate School in 1963. He then attended Army Rotary Wing Flight School, where he graduated in 1965 and received orders to the Republic of South Vietnam. While there, then Lieutenant Jackson was shot down 9 times during Project Delta, where he was supporting Allied forces in Southeast Asia and the Republic of South Vietnam. Colonel Jackson has received a number of decorations, including the Meritorious Service Medal, Presidential Unit Citation, Master Aviator Badge, the Louisiana Governor's Gold Award for Outstanding Leadership in Disabilities, Distinguished Merit Award for work with disabled veterans, the Lake Charles Mayor's Armed Forces Committee Award, and the Patriot of the Year Award. Now as the American Legion Commander for the Department of Louisiana, Colonel Jackson continues to serve his country through his work with the Veterans Affairs and as a leader in the ongoing fight for VA clinics in Southwest Louisiana. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Colonel James Jackson.
Well, the first thing I want to tell you is that Bill Friedman told me the first thing to do is come up here and throw this speech away and just talk from the heart. But I worked too hard writing this speech to do that. And I want to acknowledge, first of all, my lovely wife, Connie. Where are you at, sweetie? There she is. God bless you, darling. I'd like to ask her, we have any Gold Star families here besides Bill Friedman? One thing with our Gold Star families, we always want to remember, we don't honor them with applause. We honor them with a moment of silence because they have sacrificed it all. How about World War II veterans? Got any World War II veterans? Got one? Where's he at? Well, tell him to stand up. He's a Marine. That's okay, sir. Our greatest generation. Folks, we will never, ever forget. Like they said, I served 2 tours of Vietnam, went out bright, bushy-tailed, save the world for democracy, to fight for our country. When I got to Vietnam, we found out this would be a very difficult task. That we had friends that would not come home. I'm going to tell you a quick story about Vietnam, then I'll get on with this. Has anybody been in the Navy here? Oh, I hate the Navy. I was a helicopter pilot, and we had lost a special forces camp in December 1965. It had been overrun by the North Vietnamese Army. 2 days after it was overrun, my boss called me in and said, "Lieutenant, I need a volunteer." I'm the only one in the room. This scares me, okay? And so I said, "Well, what's wrong?" He said, "Well, inside the camp, we have 3 Americans still trapped. We lost the camp 3 days ago, Major. How can we do that? They're in a bunker that is caved in. They got a PRC-25, an FM radio, and they're going to tell us. They told us to come out when things got quiet there." I said, "Well, what are we going to do? We got to go get them. Leave no man behind." Never, ever forget that. So he said, "What do you want?" And I said, "A gun team and my helicopter." And he said, "Well, why only that?" I said, "Hell, we're not going to live through it anyway." So we went over, attacked the camp with his 2 helicopters and 1 to pick up the 3 Americans. The NVA broke and ran. They thought it was a major assault. So we landed there, and took about a minute to load these 3 people. And so then we started back out. Then they figured out once we left that we were the only one there, and they did very bad things to my helicopter. And he shot it all full of holes. So I went out, and we were going back and going into Da Nang to the hospital there, and we said, somebody's called on the radio and said, "Well, the hospital ship Repose is out there, and it is fabulous. Let's go to the hospital ship Repose. It's a Navy ship." So we went out and landed on this hospital ship Repose. They took the 3 wounded off. The Navy does a dumb thing. They tie you to the deck. You can't get off the deck. And then this guy in clean uniform. Now wait a minute. We've been in the field for 5 weeks. You know what a soldier smells like in 5 weeks in this field? It ain't pretty. And so we went out there, and this guy comes out there in clean uniform, spiffy, siren shoes, and starts yelling at me. Now I'm 2nd lieutenant with the Special Forces, and listen, that gives you a bad attitude to start with. And so this guy come out and started, he said, "How did you get ship qualified?" And being the young lieutenant with an attitude, I said, "I didn't hurt anybody, did I?" The conversation went kind of downhill from there, okay? For a good bit. And then finally, I guess he smelled us or looked at us and found out we were pretty grungy, and he said, "Hey, would you guys like a shower?" And I said, "With water?" And he said, "Well, of course with water. You know, Navy does things different from the Army. We didn't have water. Well, all we had was in our canteen, and you can't shower much with a canteen." And so we went on down the road. He took us in there, took our uniforms off. He said, "We're going to wash these things." Fed us food that didn't come out of a can. We were amazed. It was good. They said, "We got ice cream and milk." Stuff we hadn't seen in 6-8 weeks, and probably hadn't seen it in a long time before that. But so we went ahead, and then we got through with that, and he brought our uniforms back in, and he said, "Here's your uniforms." And he said, "I had to issue you new shorts. We couldn't save those." You know, it's just a great, the Navy, the corporation, really, I do love the Navy, not really dislike them. And I really, you find out new things when you deal with the Navy. They have cleanliness, they have standards for dress and stuff like that. We didn't have much of that in the Army. You know, I got shot down in Vietnam like about 9 times. Flew 2 or 3 helicopters back and never flew again. American Legion chaplain back then, Frank Streba, came up to me one day and he said, "You know, God must have a plan for you. And I hope he's doing what he wants me to do." The Army sent me back to the States to train. That's where I got this cap, my hat. Went back to a cavalry unit, and you know, is any cavalry people in here? If you ain't cav, you can't go there. Get a little salty in the Army sometimes. You just got to go there. So I spent most of the year training the troops, and we got brand new people that were right out of flight school that couldn't find the helicopter if you gave them directions. And so when flight school turned out people like that, we trained them in the field and worked with them every day. We went to Vietnam on a troop carrier, and if you haven't lived in a World War II troop carrier for 35 days, you haven't lived. Again, the Navy was taking care of us. So our air conditioner broke down on this troop carrier, and then so we went on deck, and some Russian trawler came by, and they said everybody's got to go below decks. You think it's hot here? Get in a ship in the middle of the South China Sea and go below decks for a couple of 3 days. When we went to the Central Highlands, we worked primarily the Ho Chi Minh Trail. That was the supply trail that the Vietnamese used to get all their supplies there. We did a lot of work along the trail. Some of the missions I were on are still classified. In the United States, I started going back to school. I didn't do real good in high school. Graduated 103 out of 104. So, you know, I had some gaining to do. So, it took me 12 years to get my degree, but I did. You know, it's a little hard to work an Army career, go to school, to deal with wives and babies and all these other things like that, but I did. 3 years after that, I got my master's degree, and then shortly after that, a few years after that, I got my PhD. The Army was starting to draw down. I thought I'd never make Major too, but I was 10 years a captain. Somewhere along there, I decided I wanted to go to Fort Polk, Louisiana, and retire. So I called Branch and said I'd like to go to Fort Polk, Louisiana. And the guy said to me, "You want to go where?" "Nobody wants to go there." I said, "Well, you know, it's okay, I'll go there." So he said, "Major, you get your orders in 2 weeks." 2 weeks later, I got my orders to Fort Richardson, Alaska. The Army has a weird sense of humor, folks. Yeah, anyway, they kept sending me back to Alaska. After 3 tours in Alaska, they decided I was an Arctic expert. Well, let's get down to what we're talking about today. Since 1868, we've gathered scattered flowers over the graves who served our country for the wars of our past. For those who have served the wars, fought today, and honor their memory. The men and women represent the best of America, the best of their values. Patriotism, love of country, desire to serve this country regardless of personal sacrifice. Today we remember the residents of our state to have family members who have answered the call. Those behind you on the wall and those people here. That we have not had a war on our soil since 1865 and the war between the states. We have not lived under the Army of Occupation since 1776. This is entirely due to the men and women who have sacrificed and answered the country's call and served in our military. The great wars of the 20th century were World War I and World War II. World War I was the first of its type. Most of Europe was surrounded and pulled into the conflict. The United States was very slow to enter the war. When they did, the slogan was "over there." And we sent thousands and thousands of troops over there and turned the tide, saved Europe. It was the war to end all wars. They truly believed that. They would never see war again. Well, 31,000 Americans died in World War I. When the Americans came home, they had the honors of war, the ravages of chemical war before them, and knew they never wanted to see this happen on our soil. They raised their children to have the same characteristics of their parents. instilled in them. A strong love of country, an equally strong desire to have the freedom to protect our country and the American way of life. 15 years passed since the war clouds gathered over Europe again. Adolf Hitler had built a gigantic war machine. He overran Europe. Europe had never recovered from World War I. Largely, their war fighting had been largely disassembled between World War I and World War II. And when World War I and when World War II started, the American Army was at its lowest peak since before World War I. The lowest peak. Our budget had been taken away, delivered to domestic and other issues. Great Depression, social spending. Program promised a New Deal, we're able to. But we still had mills, foundries, car manufacturing. We were able to turn those immediately into shipbuilding, tank building, weapons building. You know, people got into the weapons building. One of the Springfield typewriter built guns. People don't realize that. But these plants turned out enormous amounts of equipment in a very short time. In 1940, England stood alone against Hitler's war machine. Canada and other colonial countries sent troops to help them, and many of our young men joined the Canadian forces and also joined the British forces, the Eagle Squadron, if we remember about that. They believe everybody that did that believed firmly that the United States would join the war. And then December the 7th, 1941, when an aggressive Japanese sneak attack, dawn attack, against the military and naval forces of Port of Pearl Harbor. The following day, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill said, "Last night I slept the sleep of the saved. America had been wronged. I knew the American character. Our victory is now inevitable." Prolific words, folks. The sleeping giant was awake and angry. Our country immediately turned to a war footing. We would suffer over 1 million casualties in World War II. Measured 400,000 died. The men and women, before we were victorious, but victorious we were, because we could bring the material to them. When our men and women came home, they had a maturity and great realization of what a gift the people had living as citizens of this great country. They came home, put aside their weapons, went to work to build a great economy. These men were now our fathers, uncles, and teachers, and mentors of my generation. The men did not complain. They did what had to be done and did it well. They were an example of what it meant to be an American. In time, we, their children, would answer the nation's call to serve again. Wars in Korea, South Vietnam. These wars were different in nature. We speak of the Korean War as the forgotten war. It's never to be forgotten. We talk about the Marines. We saw the Marine Corps folks that are here today. The Marines that went all the way to the Chosin River, right up to the parallel. A Marine brigade of about 3,000 people with an Army battalion with them of about 200 people. So they had about 3,300 people with them. They got on the DMZ, and the Chinese sent 100,000 troops roaring across the border, screaming, bugling. They surrounded the Marines. The Marine colonel, at that point, gathered his troops, and they said to him, "What are we going to do, surrender?" He said, "Hell no. We're going to turn and fight back home." And they did. And you know what else they did? They didn't leave a soldier on the battlefield. 30 and 40 below zero, and we're wearing uniforms that were made for the summer or the fall at the very best. Leather boots. Can you imagine going out in 30 and 40 below zero with just a jacket on? They did. They fought their way all the way home, and victorious, and brought every man home with them. The Korean War lasted 3 years, 136 casualties, 33,000 deaths. Today, 50,000 Americans still serve in Korea. Those that answered, that were called, anyway, they were connected against communist aggression. And running out of words and water. It's hot up there. Those that served over in Vietnam had 212,000 wounded, casualties, 48,000 deaths. It's actually risen to about 52,000 now. The Vietnamese wall has 58,000 names on it today. Those who served in that war will never forget the treatment when we got home. Thank you, sir. We came home to a nation didn't care much about our military, didn't care much about our soldiers, but we served, and we served proudly. I went through a processing station, and they said, "Captain, you're gonna have to buy some civilian clothes to travel in." I'm in my dress uniform. I can go in that. You can't get off this base unless you travel in civilian clothes. Well, that didn't sit too well with me. But to get off that base, I damn sure was going to do something. So I put on the civilian clothes, and you know what? After probably 10 or 15 years, what I know now is the guy was trying to protect me. What would happen if that guy that come up and spit on me in my uniform, what would have happened? I'd have beat the stuffings out of him, and I'd have gone to jail. So he was protecting me. I didn't know it at the time. Anyway, we've tried to instill that. We never, ever, and we've seen that since the wars in the Middle East. Our country is now behind our military again. Those folks that come home and go to war, we come back and honor them. They served. We served. We tried to instill our children a sense of same duty and love of country that our country is in the Gulf War. Young men answered the call again. 9/11. Long war we've had there, folks, and it isn't over. We need to really make sure we help our people and get away. 2 years ago, our readiness in the U.S. Army and military was as low as it was in the 1930s. As low as it was in the 1930s. We needed a large increase in the military budget. Fortunately, the military has received a large increase in the military budget. They've been replacing the aging tanks, helicopters, airplanes. People, if you don't realize what you take a piece of equipment and take it in the field for a year, the folks that have been in the military understand it's really hard to maintain it the way it needs to be maintained, and with somebody banging on it with bullets and tearing holes in it. It wears out really quick. You've got to replace these things, and it's expensive. We've seen a very small increase in the military men and women. We can no longer, for years and years, our strategy was we could fight two wars, two separate, one on the European continent and one in Asia. We can no longer do that. We can now support a conflict in one place. We've had with our military increases, we've allowed the military to grow some, large scale since 1900. Anyway, I look at the flags flying here today. I reminded the men that served with me under our flag. What it means to those who serve and represent our country, the republic for which it stands. Glory represents our freedom. Today we think about the price that has been paid and continues to be paid for those words General Douglas MacArthur in World War II expressed, again, like Yanni said, duty, honor, country. Very important words for us. There's still a cry for the highest calling for those who serve today. It's just in the past. Your duty ought to be and can be all you will be. There's a rallying point and cry. The courage will fail, seems to fail. A cry and a prayer strengthens those. Currently, overseas, there are 92,000 service members still interred overseas in from World War II. 30,900 from World War I, 750 from the Spanish War. Our missing in action are still over 100,000 people. We're recovering 36 a year. Is that good enough? No. So we need to continue to, those that are buried at sea again, those that are known only to God. We should leave no stone unturned to identify and verify all of our MIAs. We owe them no less. Our veterans who are here today, I thank you for your service. We owe you so much. Thank each and every one of you for putting up with me. God bless America. God bless our soldiers.
And Colonel, if I could indulge you for a minute, we're going to add to your list of awards and achievements. I'm going to ask the Jefferson Parish Council to join me. We have a proclamation here for you talking about your esteemed career. I'm going to do a photo if y'all want to come up for a photo. Sarah, how do you want us? Okay, that's fine.
I get one looking right here, okay? On three. 1, 2, 3.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you for your service.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's give another round of applause for Colonel Jackson. And now at this time, I will ask the Marine Corps Band New Orleans to perform the Armed Forces Medley. Please stand and be recognized when your service hymn is played. Now, Marines, I know y'all play the last one better than all the rest of them, but if you could step the Navy hymn up a little bit, you got a lot of Navy here people, including your parish president. Just throw it out there, okay? Please allow me to invite Chaplain George Tenney with the American Legion Post 175 to lead us in the benediction, and then we will have our laying of the wreaths after that.
Good morning. Please stand and uncover for the benediction. O holy God, our Heavenly Father, for over 200 years, you have blessed us with brave men and women who have been willing to defend our freedom. And we thank you for each of them and all our veterans. They stand in an unbroken line of brave defenders of freedom at home and abroad, being mindful of all those that find themselves in harm's way on the far-flung battlefronts of the world. We invoke your divine blessing. May your protection and grace surround them each day as they carry out their duties, assigned missions and deployments around the world. May those who have given their lives in the cause of freedom rest forever in your holy presence, sir. Comfort their families who mourn and are left to remember the precious lives of their loved ones. Help us to honor and support them, Lord. Let us be ever mindful of each service made on behalf of the American people by our sons, daughters, husbands, fathers, and friends. Let your healing hand be upon them who have suffered grievous wounds and traumatic injuries. Father, may peace throughout the world be our goal, but never at the cost of compromising what is right and good for America and all humanity. Help us to be ever vigilant in guarding the liberties which you have bestowed upon us as a great nation. Let the courage of those who defend our way of life never be taken for granted, Lord. Give guidance to our leaders at all levels. May wise decisions be made which will reflect your divine will for each day, each crisis, and each future event. All this we lift up to you, knowing that in your sight and wisdom, it greatly exceeds our limited sight and abilities. We place our confidence in you for all things, Father. As we remember your promise to be with us always, even to the end of the ages. Amen.
And now Colonel Jackson will lead in the laying of the wreath, followed by taps. Please remain standing for this ceremony. In just 2 weeks, the nation will commemorate the 75th anniversary of D-Day on June the 6th. We must never forget the 1,465 U.S. deaths on this one-day invasion called Operation Overlord. President Reagan once said, "Memorial Day is a day of ceremonies and speeches. We honor the dead of our wars. We recall their valors and their sacrifices. We remember they gave their lives so that others might live." Reagan also said, when President Lincoln spoke at the ceremony at Gettysburg in 1863, he reminded us that through their deeds, the dead had spoken more eloquently for themselves than any of the living ever could, and that the living could only honor them by rededicating ourselves to the cause that they so willingly gave a last full measure of devotion. Anyone currently serving or who has a family member currently serving in our military, please know that the people of Jefferson Parish appreciate your service and will continue to keep you in our thoughts and prayers as you fight to protect this country and our freedom. Thank you for joining us today, and may God bless each of you and all of those who have served this great country. We do have refreshments that are being served after the ceremony, and I do want to thank the Department of Citizens Affairs, Ms. Donna Russo, our General Services Department, and our Recreation Department, along with Parkways, for maintaining this beautiful facility with all of these great memorials. And let's give a special round of applause again to the United States Marine Corps Band New Orleans for being with us today. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing everybody at our Veterans Day ceremony in November.